The Canberra Chess Club Championship 2023, Round 4. A French Frog. During my preparation for the Canberra Chess Club Championship this year, I prepared many lines against the French defence. Specifically, I decided that I would exchange the pawn, leading to a drawish but comfortable position, and I would see if my opponents would slip up. Well, tonight, in round 4 of the Canberra Chess Club Championship, I had a chance to put my theory to the test. I played e4, and my opponent played e6, the French defence. After d4 and d5, I captured and he recaptured as he should with the pawn, and I continued with natural developing moves, as did he. I played queen e2 check here, knowing that to be the theoretical line according to my preparation, and he correctly played queen e7, leading to a trade and early castling for both sides. I knew without a doubt that the ultimate setup here for white involves playing c3 to solidify the d4 pawn, and with the pawn on c3 occupying the square that the knight would otherwise like to use, the knight is ultimately going to come to d2, and that's the kind of setup that you would usually go for here. Well, I thought I'd first start with h3, just to take this square away from his knight or bishop, and then he played a6, keeping things very much symmetrical. It's almost a perfectly symmetrical position, except that I already have a rook on the open file, and hence I should be ever so slightly better here. Now I played bishop e3, he played knight c6, and here I played c3 as planned. Actually, no, I didn't play c3 as planned to solidify my center. For some reason, I decided to play knight d2 first, and then seeking maybe to follow up with even a break to c4. Well, it didn't take me long to realize that knight b to d2 was a mistake, and it didn't take my opponent long to realize either. He played knight b4, immediately attacking my bishop and the pawn. And the problem is that he's threatening if I just don't do anything. At the very least, he's threatening to take my bishop and double up my pawns, which is not something I'm very fond of. But at the same time, I can't move my bishop away and hold the bishop safe, because if I do something like that, then he jumps the knight in, winning a pawn and landing a fork against both of my rooks. So that is not something I can even entertain the thought of. So here I knew I had made a mistake, but I continued on trying. I played knight e5, thinking that after he captures my bishop, maybe I can recapture with my knight. I didn't play this in the end though, because I didn't like that he could follow up with this bishop move, attacking my knight again, once again threatening to take, and when I recapture, my pawns will again be doubled. And I thought it's going to be hard for me to move this knight away anywhere. I can't defend my pawn. For example, coming here to defend the pawn won't work for obvious reasons. So I actually decided, after he took my bishop, to take back with the pawn and keep my knight in a relatively nice position. He followed up by immediately attacking this weakness on d3, a weakness which is, for the moment, defended by my knight on e5. So he might be wanting at some point, if I do nothing, to take my knight, and then hopefully take this pawn. But at the moment, because of the way my pawn is pressuring his knight, he would have to move his knight, and that would give me a chance to actually use this attacked pawn to defend the other attacked pawn. And so that meant that really he wasn't ready to take this knight yet. I decided though that I wanted to keep this knight here, I wanted to keep it strong, and I just wanted to prepare for an eventuality where he did give up this bishop for my knight, in which case this c7 pawn would become weak. So I played rook a c1, putting some pressure on this pawn. He followed with rook f to e1, and here I played rook e to d1, which is a mistake, My idea here was again preparing for the eventuality that he takes my knight. I can then take back, and my calculated line was if bishop takes pawn, I can take the pawn up here on c7, and if he then takes this pawn, my knight will be able to jump away with an attack on his rook at the same time as my rook attacks his bishop. And this line would in fact be good for me as white. Only now in the analysis I see that after he takes the knight, if in fact he takes the knight and I take back, it's absolutely nonsensical for him to take this pawn because I would take this knight right here. But I didn't see that in my calculations over the board. And it didn't matter because after rook e to d1, he simply played c6, really telling me that, hey, this bishop, this rook here is doing nothing. This pawn is rock solid. Of course, I did have thoughts of sacrificing my knight for 2 pawns, but considering I'm already down material and I've got doubled pawns, I really can't afford to play in such a way as this. This is not going to turn out well for me at all. So I decided instead to play my other knight to f3 and just try to solidify this knight. Now, if he ever takes, I can at the very least just take back with my other knight, and this pawn will always be defended not only by the knight, but by the rook, and maybe I can hold things steady for a draw. He continued by bringing his rook across, again, not very creative play, but doing just what he needs to do in a position where I've already ruined my position. He just brings pieces into the center, makes sure he doesn't have weaknesses, and if you keep fast forwarding, you're just going to find that there's nothing I can do. So I played rook c3 here, just trying to protect my pawn again. Maybe I'm going to double up my rooks one day. And he just dropped his bishop back. Now at this stage I made a strategic error. I thought that him having moved his bishop back presented an opportunity to play g4 and prevent his bishop from ever getting back here. And with his bishop not being able to get here, he won't be able to attack this pawn as effectively. Now, I had thought maybe on the previous move, like here, if I had played g4, he could just move the bishop back this way and therefore keep it on this diagonal. But now that he's gone back this way, I thought g4 makes sense, keeping him out of f5. Also keeping in mind that if he wants to bring the bishop this way to defend my pawn, he would have to play a move like this to open up the diagonal for his bishop, but doing that would allow this rook to come to life. So I thought here that g4 made sense, but the reason it's a strategic error is because in positions where you're worse, and I am here, and I have a worse pawn structure, you actually want to try and keep things compact. And g4 just goes the wrong way, pushing pawns down the board, makes targets for him in the future, which we'll see. Here he played knight d7, and what I really needed to do here was just to trade. But I didn't do that. I played bishop f4, and probably stupidly. I was thinking maybe in some distant future I could try to set up a tactic by protecting my bishop and playing something like this to attack a rook and a bishop at the same time. Basically, this move was over-ambitious, and it also led directly to a tactical loss. Here, he could have played knight f8. He didn't, but he could have. And knight f8 has the effect of basically just taking away the possibility of me trading an equal trade. And it means my knight's got no safe squares. You'll see none of these squares are safe for my knight. And therefore, where's my knight going to go? On the next move, he's going to play f6, and my knight will be doomed. Meanwhile, I can't just move my knight away, because then my bishop on f4 will be taken by his dark squared bishop. Thankfully, he didn't play that, though. He played f6 immediately, and then I did trade twice. Again, here I thought maybe I can hold out for the draw, but I didn't really know exactly how I was going to do that. I played the move rook c2 to prevent his rook from getting access to e2. There wasn't really a lot else I could do. The computer says I could have tried rook e1, which of course was on my radar, but I didn't like that after he takes and I take back, he could immediately play this move, taking aim at this pawn, which we now see why it's not good to have overextended myself here. This pawn is attacked twice, once by the pawn and once by the bishop. It's only defended once. I could defend it again, but now I'm making big weaknesses in my position, specifically on e3, and he'll eventually use that square for his rook. And I just didn't like the way that that variation was going. That's why I played this and thought I'll just try and stay stable. And if he attacks this pawn, which he did, he attacked it from the other direction, I defended with my knight, and after he took, I took back with my knight, claiming that if he takes my knight with his bishop, which he did, I would take back with my pawn, and at least he doesn't have that bishop anymore to pester this pawn. Maybe I can, again, hold the draw. But he doubled his rooks on the d-file. I played rook fd1, just bringing my king to f1, bringing my king closer to e1 and e2, therefore preventing his rooks from gaining access here. And here, he is a little bit better and gradually should be able to win. But after king f7, I played f4, another strategic error, and again, going against that general principle that when you're worse and when you're behind, don't push your pawns forward, keep them all compact. I again overlooked this weakness of the e3, which he now used for his rooks to infiltrate. I thought I could just put my rook over here on an open file and claim that he'll never be able to actually infiltrate, because if he gives me a check, I'll block, which I did. And only then I realized, oh, bugger, now he can bring the other rook in. Now he's got two rooks attacking this pawn. I've only got one rook defending it. I can't bring the other one over because it's pinned to my king. So here I realized I'm very much lost. I'm very much lost here. But he didn't actually play rook e here. He instead played this move. And this is a tricky move. I can't play anything like this now to try and counteract his rook, because he would play this rook check. My king has to move, and then he simply wins the entire rook, and I can resign here. So that's not an option. There's not a lot of good options, really. I ended up playing this move, which is the best computer move, just connecting my rooks, trying to hold on for dear life. But after he played the rook into e3 anyway, putting so much pressure on this pawn, there's again no way that I can possibly defend this pawn. So I decided I'll just give it up. I'll just make a nothing move. He'll take the pawn and I'll come back so that I at least defend this pawn. But, he traded, gave me a check, threatening this pawn, so forcing me to come back. He traded again. And now we're in this endgame position where he just has an extra pawn, and my pawn structure is worse. He played g6, and I knew I was worse. I knew I needed to try something, but there was really nothing to try. I played f5, he took and I took back. And the reason I did this was so that my pawn would prevent his king from infiltrating here. I saw that his king could come around this way, and I would follow. And then if he came here, I knew I could come here as well, keeping what's called the opposition. Now his king can only go back, and it might come down to pawn play. But I also realized that if there's pawn play, he might even be able to just play a move like this straight away, threatening to take this pawn. If I take, he pushes forward, and now this pawn is really going to quickly become a queen, and I need to keep my king inside the square of this pawn. So I would need to play a move like this. He can push again. I would have to stay again within the square of the pawn. He pushes again, I come down, he can get a queen. I can take. And the whole point of that was not to get a queen, but it was so that he can then play this move. And whatever, I can come a bit closer, he takes this, and he can now use this king and pawn configuration to ultimately win the game. At least that was my calculation, which is why I decided in the end, in this position, not to take the opposition, but instead I decided to play b4. I wondered whether maybe I could let him come in here, which he did. Then I played a4, take my pawn, and only then take the opposition. And I wondered if maybe when he moves to the side, I just keep taking the opposition. this structure right here, if there's nothing else on the board, that structure is a draw. So I wondered whether maybe he would have to push pawns in a way where I could actually take, and maybe I'd be the one to have a pass pawn. A bit of a dream, but I had to try something. But he just started pushing his pawn, and because this isn't the only thing on the board, because there are all these other pawns, this structure itself is in fact enough to win. So I kind of waited. I played king f2. He just gradually made progress. I played a5, losing hope. He played f3, and here, of course, I realized it's entirely hopeless. There's no point playing on, and I resigned. I have to say, in this game, I felt quite indifferent. I thought and mentioned in the last video that I might play with a newfound sense of freedom now that I know I'm not going to win the tournament. But mistakenly, I played instead with a newfound sense of recklessness and carelessness, which is not the same thing as freedom. Really, to play with a sense of freedom, you must play with a sense of responsibility. And tonight I played completely without responsibility. Going straight back to the very start, e4, e6, d4, d5. I know that exchanging here, although it is what I prepared, I know it's just a drawish line. And really, I should have probably just played one of the main lines, like knight c3 or maybe knight d2, and had an interesting game. I could play I could have also played the advance. There's a lot of different ways you can do this other than the exchange. I'm not saying this was the decision that lost the game for me or anything. In fact, it was fine and I can look past it. In fact, I can accept it as maybe it was even a good decision. But I would say that particularly in this position here, I really needed to play c3. c3 here, and my position is fine. Everything is at least going to go to a draw. And maybe I'll end up with something better than draw eventually. But you can see here I don't have any weaknesses. So, how does he continue? Well, if he wants to keep things pretty symmetrical, he can do something like this. I can just develop my knight. Everything is nice. Now, it's going to be a long draw, a long drawn-out struggle. It might not get anywhere in the end, but it would have been a lot better than playing this move, which I played very quickly, and enabling this, which is a very predictable response to my move. I just clearly didn't think about it at all, and that's what I mean by playing recklessly. Also, if I had thought more carefully here, actually I probably could have allowed this. Although he is threatening, like I said, to take and double my pawns, and although I can't move my knight away, what I could have done here was move my bishop here, opposing his bishop, so that if he takes me, I take him. If he takes me, I take him, and things again remain basically pretty even. Or if he takes me here, I take here. Then if he takes here, I could have brought a rook across this way, and when he moves the bishop, I could have won this pawn. And again, things remain pretty even. But I didn't really think it through. I didn't spend a long time on the decision. I simply captured with the pawn without a lot of thought. From then on, this move also didn't come with a lot of thought. And I have to say that I really do feel that I should apologize to myself and also to you watching because of how I played. And I'll endeavour to bounce back and at least play a game that's worth playing. If I'm going to play at all, I might as well go and think. I finished this game, I still had almost 20 minutes on the clock when the position basically became hopeless. I mean, at this point here where I played knight bd2, I still had 54 minutes on the clock. There was absolutely no reason to rush this move. I could have thought for a little while, but I just didn't. So anyway, hopefully next week I will play a game worth playing, and I will create a video worth watching. Until then, take care of yourselves and others. Leave a comment to rev me up for the next round, and I'll see you then.